What's up, Pags here at MEI Studio. Welcome back. Through calamity can sometimes come clarity. When a preamp in the studio decided to stop working and its manufacturer refused to provide a very simple solution to fix it, we wound up having to pick up a new multi-channel preamp with digitally controlled functions and stepped gain for recallability and precision. Exactly what the old pre was supposed to provide. Well, prepare for a deep dive into the SSL Pure Drive Octo, this time on the mic locker. I wasn't able to find a lot about Colin Sanders' early life before 1969, except that he was born February 23, 1947, in the UK. Around 1968, Acorn Records was started by Colin, and a studio was set up at Stonesfield, Oxfordshire, England. The label was a niche endeavor that recorded a lot of folk music and things that were not as mainstream at the time as other things were. One of those things being theater organ music. In 1969, while Colin was doing some freelance work for Hammond, he was directed to check out construction of a new electronic pipe organ for the Glasgow Cathedral. There he found many of the craftsmen that were supposed to be working on the wood and metal work of the organ, fighting with wiring harnesses and switches. Colin mentioned to one of the workers that this could all be done much easier using diodes and transistors, to which the worker replied, "Well, why don't you go and design a system to do that?" And so he did. He created a solid-state circuit to perform the logic duties for the church organ, and solid-state logic was born. Some years later, while trying to find a console for Acorn Studio, Colin decided that none of the existing consoles of the time met his needs and decided to take some of the ideas from his organ logic system and put them to use in a recording console, the likes of which the world had never seen. Two prototypes were developed with the designation of the SL4000A. At the time, the Neve 80 series consoles were the go-to all around the UK, and breaking into the market was not going to be an easy task. Colin and his partner, Paul Bamborough, decided to sweeten the pot, and next step was to introduce the use of one of those newfangled microcomputers to handle the task of controlling even more functions, like fader automation, tape machine controls, and other things. A total of 6 of these consoles, called the SL4000B, were produced and sent to some very high-end studios like Virgin Records' Townhouse Studio, and a little place called Abbey Road Studio, amongst others. Maybe you've heard of that one. The next iteration of the console, the SL4000E, featured a new 4-band EQ on each channel, which was a collaboration with Sir George Martin. The 4000E had the ability to save and recall pretty much all of the console's controls using the computer's big old 5.25-inch discs. Yep, some big puppies. The console was the first to feature a compressor and gate on each channel, as well as the first to add the famous SSL bus compressor, which helped to provide that record-ready glue to the mix. As if that wasn't enough, the console also featured the ability to adjust or trim the VCAs, or voltage-controlled amplifiers, to set the operating level of the board. This would allow engineers to be able to drive the board more or less to hit a sweet spot and get some extra saturation out of the mix. SSL unveiled its next iteration, the SL4000G, at the 1987 AES show in New York City, which featured new EQ and some other enhancements. This console would go on to find a home in many a studio all over the world. Variants of the console were made for different purposes like broadcast, film, and video. These consoles were given the 5000, 6000, and 8000 designations. It was in 1995 that SSL released the 9000 series, which featured the newly designated Super Analog design, which was a capacitor-free signal path, and perhaps the largest bandwidth ever seen in an audio console. The response actually exceeded specs for 192 kHz converters as far as the analog signal was concerned. Some Allen Sides level of crazy. And incidentally, there's a story where Alan had the folks from SSL fly their helicopter to Glenn John's house in England for dinner, which led to the largest, newest SSL console to be delivered to Ocean Way Studios. Helicopters, incidentally, are how Colin's story ends, as he was killed in a helicopter accident on January 28, 1998. His ethos of enabling people to concentrate on what they do well rather than to have to fight the technology they need to do their job is both admirable and something we should all strive to achieve in the studio. With all the gear we have and use, we should always try to make the technology transparent to the creative process, which is why gear upgrades should almost always be based on the idea that learning new tools should make things easier and save time. After Colin's passing, the company continued to break new ground and innovate in the console and new project studio market as well. Smaller consoles meant for home studios, the Duality, AWS 924, AWS 948, XL Desk, and Matrix 2, and the Origin console, amongst others, which is where our subject is taken from. The PureDrive Quad and our subject, the Octo, are based off the Origin console's preamp section with some added bells and whistles. Since this is my first hardware review, so to speak, I'm going to kind of wing it as far as how to test this, and hopefully I can come up with something we can use in the future for consistency's sake. I mean, we usually do microphone reviews here, and to test a preamp, you kind of have to know what the mic sounds like, so you know what the pre sounds like. Yeah, it's a little difficult. But let's take a tour of the device first, starting at the back and the I/O that the unit provides. On the right, we have 8 combo jacks for the microphone or line inputs. If one plans on using this unit strictly as a mixdown device, the line-ins will prove useful. However, since they're combo jacks, you can't use these jacks in a permanent installation situation for both microphone and line duty. However, SSL thought of this and decided to add an alternate line-in method in the way of a DB25 connector. Below the line input DB25, there's an insert return DB25, which also serves 2 functions. First, if you're using the analog to digital conversion built into the unit, you can use this as a preamp bypass, so you can hook up other external preamps to the unit and use it as a 32-bit converter or interface. The second use is to be able to patch in external hardware before the converter as well. There's no way to use the inserts and the analog out at the same time, which makes sense since if you're going to use the analog outs, you can just patch into whatever hardware you want to hit post preamp and then go wherever converters you have are. Pretty easy. Moving to the left further, we have a bank of 4 AES EBU XLR outputs, which allow for full clock rate 8 channels of digital output. If you're not feeling the AES outputs but still want to go digital, there are a pair of Toslink outputs which can be used solo or muxed to provide any clock rate from 44.1K all the way up to 192K. Next up, we have our word clock in and out and termination. This is used for coax connection to a master clock, which is needed for a multiple interface setup like what we use here in the studio. If the preamp is the last piece of gear in the chain, you can use the 75 ohm switch to let the clock know that the line is terminated there. Finally, we have the USB-C port and the power IEC. Let's take a minute to talk about what's possible with the USB-C port. In its basic use, the USB port allows the unit to be updated should any firmware be released. It also allows the unit to be used as an interface. Using the USB-C port disables the clocking and source buttons from the front panel and moves control onto the host computer. On the host machine, the SSL will show up as an 8-channel analog input and up to a 24-channel digital output if your clock rate is set to 48K. You get less channels the higher the clock rate is. Try and explain this later on, maybe. Since there's only an analog to digital converter, the only possible outputs the unit can use are the digital outputs, so there won't be any analog monitoring through this unit by itself. The manual suggests using another device to monitor by setting up either an aggregate device on Mac or whatever Windows-based machine has to do to use multiple interfaces. The manual only goes into setting up the driver for Windows. It doesn't go into any of that kind of stuff. Now that the boring side is out of the way, let's flip it around and deal with the business end of things. This time, let's go left to right, and we only need to talk about one channel since the functions are the same on each one of the channels. First up, we have 4 instrument inputs for channels 1 through 4. The inputs are activated by simply plugging a cable into the jack. This changes the routing from either the mic input or the line input in the back to the instrument input without any button pushes. Next, we have the gain knob. While its function should speak for itself, these gain knobs have a few functions of themselves. First is to set the primary gain of the channel from +5 to +65 dB in 6 dB steps, or an 11-step rotary device. It's not clear if this is a potentiometer, switch, or a rotary encoder, as the information I've found doesn't specify. When in line mode, the gain switches its behavior to 0 to 30 dB in 3 dB steps. Pressing the knob quickly engages the polarity inversion. Pressing and holding the knob engages the 48-volt phantom power. Below the gain knob, we find the trim knob, which allows for fine-tuning the primary gain stage plus or minus 15 dB. It does this with a 31-step rotary thing in increments of 1 dB. This is an extra gain stage, by the way, which when pushed to the max means that this preamp is capable of a total of 80 dB of gain. That's on par with my RPQ preamps, which are my go-to ribbon pre's for both gain and impedance reasons. Like the gain knob, there are multiple functions here. A quick press will engage the 18 dB per octave third-order high-pass filter at 75 Hz. A longer press will switch the preamp input from mic to line in. Still below, we have a Z ohm button. Kind of a redundancy since Z and ohm are used interchangeably. Anyway, fun fact, on a Mac, if you hold the Option and hit the Z key, you get the ohm symbol. Who would have thought? By default, the pre puts itself into green mode, which is a 12K impedance. A short press turns green to white and makes the preamp go into 1.2K mode, and another short press changes the white mode to yellow, or amber as they call it in the manual, and this is a 600 ohm impedance. And one more press, we go from yellow to red, or 400 ohm mode. This mode will seriously change the tone of just about any mic you put through the pre, leaving it severely underloaded, most of the time. A long press on this button cycles through the list in reverse. The last button on the channel is the drive button. By default, the button is white, which is the ultra clean super analog preamp. The buttons here work in a different way. The quick press turns the drive mode on. The long press selects which drive mode is going to be turned on. So from default settings, a quick press brings us to the yellow mode, or amber. I guess the British prefer the term amber over yellow. It just sounds more fancy, I guess. It's yellow for us normal folk. Anyway, this mode puts us into classic drive mode, which is predominantly odd order harmonics being added. This is the same drive mode found on the Origin console, and I'm going to guess that this is supposed to somewhat emulate the old VCA trick to drive the old 4000 series consoles. But that's just speculation on my part. The first long press will activate green mode. Surprised they didn't call this Emerald. But anyway, this is a drive mode unique to the PureDrive Quad and Octo preamps. This mode activates asymmetrical drive mode, which adds predominantly even order harmonics, which will kind of simulate a tube drive almost. This button will also flash red if you're clipping the channel in either the main gain or the trim gain. After repeating this 7 times, we get to the right control panel. At the top, we have our sleep mode button that's disguised as a power switch since it bears the universal symbol for power. This annoys me a lot. Instead of putting a real power switch on the front so the unit could be properly powered on and off from the front, we put a soft switch on the front that just puts the unit into standby mode or wakes it up from standby mode. This button has another function as well, which we'll get into in a little bit. Below the standby button, we have the insert button. When pressed, a pretty white light show ensues where you can select which channels you want to engage the insert on by pressing the Z button on each channel. There's no long press function here. Below the insert button, there's a rate button. When pressed and in internal clock mode, this will cycle through the different sample rates from 44.1K to 192K in an intriguing way. There's only a 44.1 and 48K indicator, and then there's a X2 and X4 indicator. So for 192 kilohertz, you'll see the 48K light up with the 4X lit up as well. I guess this was the most efficient way of going about this rather than 8 separate lights. You only have 4 to deal with. To the right, we have the meter and function display. This includes 8 6-segment LED meters to show levels and peaks on each of the 8 channels, the clock rate and source, and if the USB port is activated. You may have thought we were done with this side, but we're not. Far from it. In an attempt to make this video pretty much a video manual for this unit, for anybody out there that doesn't want to read the manual, there are a ton of hidden features available, but only if you activate a secret mode by pressing and holding the clock button while the unit powers up. Once the boot procedure finishes, you're brought into settings mode. Many of the buttons and some gain knobs change function to set various options for the preamp. The Z and drive buttons on channel 1 set the brightness of the buttons. The Z and drive buttons on channel 2 set the brightness of the meters. And the Z and drive buttons on channel 3 set the source of the digital outputs. The Z button will toggle the source of the AES outs between the A and D converter or the USB port. The drive button sets the source of the ADAT output between the A and D converter or the USB port as well. The Z button on channel 4 sets safe mode. This allows the unit to have its polarity, phantom, HPF, and line input functions from being accidentally activated. Once you get the unit set up with the settings that you need for operation, you can turn safe mode on and the unit will boot with the settings set as you have them set and cannot be changed unless you go back into safe mode and turn it off. This could be helpful if a unit's being used in a live venue where its function is the same and does not need to be changed and shouldn't be changed. There are no function on the buttons of channel 5. The Z and drive buttons on channel 6, however, functions in regards to the metering. The Z button will change the peak hold from default of 3 seconds in orange mode. What was once known as amber is now orange. It's yellow, folks. Green is a 1-second hold and red is a 10-second hold. The drive button sets the ballistics of the meter from a default of standard, what they call standard, on yellow, or now it's orange now, green being slow and red being fast. There are no functions on the buttons for channel 7. Channel 8 Z and drive buttons will change the duration of the auto timeout or auto sleep mode from a just silly 15 seconds all the way up to 75 minutes. 20 minutes is the default. Channel 2 gain knob controls the relay feedback sounds. By default, the 48V light is lit and the relays will make sounds when a function is engaged. When you turn it on, it also makes a clicking noise. There's a typo in the manual that says both the 48V on and off enable the function. In reality, the light being off disables the relay feedback. Basically, if the clicking annoys you when hitting buttons, you can turn off the sounds. Kind of weird. I'd like to know how they do that. Channel 4 gain knob sets the auto power setting. Remember when I said it was kind of annoying that the unit didn't have a power button up front? Well, I sort of take that back with this function by turning this from the default of on to off. When power is applied to the unit, instead of the unit just turning on, it'll stay in standby mode until you hit the power button. Okay. Channel 8 gain knob sets the auto sleep mode from enabled to disabled. By default, this is disabled. The power button is long pressed to save and reboot the device. Now we're done with all the technical functions. Let's see what this actually sounds like. We're going to try out the different impedances with an electric guitar test. Then we're going to try out the drive on some drums and some vocals. We're also going to test the difference between my Avid converters and the converter built into the unit. And finally, we're going to compare the pre's in this unit to the preamp in the SSL 2+. Let's get to it. Okay, we're going to run the preamp through Plugin Doctor and see if we can see the harmonics that we get from the different drive modes. This is the drive off, or white mode. And we can see that the harmonics that we're getting right now are pretty much below 100 dB, so essentially non-existent. And now if we bring this up to clipping, we can see that we're getting distortion on pretty much all harmonics here. And now we're in the yellow drive mode, and we can see that the odd order harmonic is the predominant harmonic here. Bring this down a little bit, it becomes even more apparent. And now if we go from yellow to green, we should see a shift in the harmonics. And in green mode here, we're looking at a higher predominant even order harmonic. And in this mode also, even if we're going into clipping, we see that the even order harmonic is still kind of predominant.
Can't stand the heat, but just a fire. Ow. And ain't nobody doing things the way you do. So candy sweet, perfect liar. Wrapped around your finger, I'd do anything for you. Can't stand the heat, but just a fire. Ow. And ain't nobody doing things the way you do. So candy sweet, perfect liar. Wrapped around your finger, I'd do anything for you. Can't stand the heat, but just a fire. Ow. And ain't nobody doing things the way you do. So candy sweet, perfect liar. Wrapped around your finger, I'd do anything for you. Can't stand the heat, but just a fire. Ow. And ain't nobody doing things the way you do. So candy sweet, perfect liar. Wrapped around your finger, I'd do anything for you. Can't stand the heat, but just a fire. Ow. And ain't nobody doing things the way you do. So candy sweet, perfect liar. Wrapped around your finger, I'd do anything for you. Can't stand the heat, but just a fire. Ow. And ain't nobody doing things the way you do. So candy sweet, perfect liar. Wrapped around your finger, I'd do anything for you. Can't stand the heat, but just a fire. Ow. And ain't nobody doing things the way you do. So candy sweet, perfect liar. Wrapped around your finger, I'd do anything for you.
This is a comparison using a Shure SM58 through the PureDrive Octo and the SSL 2 Plus USB audio interface. This is a comparison using a Shure SM58 through the PureDrive Octo and the SSL 2 Plus USB audio interface. This is a comparison using a Shure SM58 through the PureDrive Octo and the SSL 2 Plus USB audio interface. This is a comparison using the Shure SM58 with the SSL Pure Drive Octo on Classic Drive mode and the SSL 2 Plus in 4K mode. This is a comparison using the Shure SM58 with the SSL Pure Drive Octo on Classic Drive mode and the SSL 2 Plus in 4K mode. This is a comparison using the Shure SM58 with the SSL Pure Drive Octo on Classic Drive mode and the SSL 2 Plus in 4K mode. This is a direct comparison between the SSL converter and my Avid converter. This is converter A, this is converter B. Converter A, converter B. A, B. This is a direct comparison between the SSL converter and my Avid converter. This is converter A, this is converter B. Converter A, converter B. A, B. This is a direct comparison between the SSL converter and my Avid converter. This is converter A, this is converter B. Converter A, converter B. A, B. The current price of this unit is right around $2,500. That's no small amount to be throwing around. However, when we look at what we're really getting, the value shows itself. We're getting an 8-channel preamp. 8 channels of SSL super analog preamps. Same as we're getting in the $55,000 Origin 32 console. There are also 4 instrument inputs on the front that allow us to sit at the mix position and rock some guitar, bass, or synths without having to get out of the chair. If that's all we got, we'd be looking at around a little over $300 per channel. But we're also getting a color box with different saturation options that can easily be used for both recording and mixing thanks to the various input options on the back of the unit. In addition, we're also getting a 32-bit float analog to digital converter that can be used not only for the preamps in this unit, but for any 8 preamps you might already have lying around, since you can bypass the preamps and hit the A to D converter directly by using the returns input on the back. But why stop there? We're also getting an 8-in and up to 24-out USB-C interface as well. In my opinion, it's a lot of bang for the buck. The stepped gain and trim knobs make recall a snap for recording or mixing purposes. Let's be honest here, if my Avid Pre didn't die, there was no way I was going to buy this thing. But since it did, I found this was probably the best option out there for my needs. I needed 8 channels of extremely accurate and matchable preamps. This has it. Avid's current next generation product, the Carbon Pre, goes for around $3,000 and is as sterile as the old Pre was. Okay. I'd wager that they're probably really close to the same preamps inside as the previous generation, since they really didn't change anything from the prior generation of the one that I had. Well, the new Carbon Pre has digitally controlled pre's and also has an A to D converter as well as a D to A converter built in with the control available directly through the DAW. There's no character at all, and it's only good for recording. It offers nothing as far as being a color box for recording or mixing, or as a potential interface, which, if I'm being completely honest, I'll probably never use. But it's there, and it's $500 less in the SSL. I feel confident in my purchase here, and hopefully SSL will support their products better than Avid does. It's not really too hard. What are the cons besides the steep price tag? Well, to be honest, I'm not really seeing any. I do have a small wish list that would have been nice to have. For one, stereo channel linking would have been great. Granted, all the knobs are stepped, but would have been nice. Since this can be used as an A to D converter, a single pair of D to A would have been cool for monitoring purposes to use this as a standalone interface. Bit of a stretch, but again, a list of nice to haves. The 4-channel unit has an adjustable high-pass filter. While I rarely find myself using the filter on the preamp, probably would have gone with a higher value on the filter. Again, not a deal breaker by any stretch. So, my final thoughts on this. It's a beast of a unit with a lot of modern features any engineer would love to have. It's not cheap, but for what you get in the box, you're looking at a recording and mixing powerhouse. The saturation is usable and not over the top and can be used either from the mic or in mixdown. Having now used this Pre on a couple of projects, its ease of use has been a welcome addition to the studio's repertoire. I don't recommend anyone buy anything that I review here. I leave that up to the needs of the individual and for them to make that decision themselves. However, if this checks all the boxes for what your needs are, I think it's a great choice. I did a lot of research before pulling the trigger on this. The price tag alone called for major due diligence. But don't take my word for it. Hopefully this video allowed you to hear the preamp in practical ways that I haven't seen done before in any videos. In fact, I was looking for a video that kind of showed more of the functions and didn't really get what I was looking for. So I hope I nailed this one. If you have any questions about it, though, please feel free to leave me a message in the comments or through the website. Love to hear from you. If you're interested in picking up the 4 or 8 channel Pre, I have a couple of links in the description. Using the link doesn't cost you anything extra, and it helps fund the channel for future videos, and it is an affiliate link with Sweetwater. And this does work for anything that you might want to pick up from them as well. As always, if you've gotten anything from this video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons. It'll really help us out. If you're interested in studio gear, mics, and all things recording, hit that notify button so you know when we post something new. If you want to support the channel even further, consider becoming a member of the channel. Thanks for checking this out, and that's going to do it for this time. This is Pags, signing off.